Does your comic need to be 100% finished before you launch it on Kickstarter? That's kind of what I want to talk about on this video today. Hey, everybody, Tyler James here, and I'm with Comics Launch, and we are a show and a stream and a service all about planning, launching, funding, and fulfilling awesome Kickstarter campaigns, primarily for writers, artists, comic creators, and self-publishers. And so if that's you, you're definitely in the right place. And a question or a comment that I get a lot from creators who are trying to Sorry, I got a little boy trying to jump in here. Creators who want to launch on Kickstarter is they say, well, yeah, I want to launch my thing, but my book is not done, or my book needs to be finished before I launch it. And this is sort of an interesting thing, and I want to dive into this. Before I do that, though, I want to just make sure that you know that if you are planning a Kickstarter launch or you want to start planning a Kickstarter launch, I encourage you to download the free guide that I put together. It's called the Successful Comic Book Kickstarter Roadmap. It has basically the steps to a successful launch laid out in a very easy to digest format. So if you've never been on this journey before, or you've maybe launched on Kickstarter, but you felt like there were a couple of pieces missing to your game, this roadmap is going to be a valuable tool for you on your journey. All right. So I hope you grab it, comicslaunch.com/roadmap. So this question or this thing that goes around here that you can't launch a successful Kickstarter project until it's 100% finished is actually kind of funny, because when you've been around the platform, been in the crowdfunding world for over 8 years now that I've been in it, and probably longer than that since I started doing my research and studying this thing, it's kind of funny because it used to be that the common saying or the common myth or the common feeling was that the exact opposite, right? That it wasn't too long ago where people were arguing the exact opposite, that, hey, Kickstarter is only for projects that need funding to get going. And so, it's not a pre-order system, and it's not for projects that are already done. Like, Kickstarter's just for new stuff that needs funding, and therefore, the less you have done, the more you need Kickstarter, and therefore that's what Kickstarter is for you, right? And so it's funny how platforms evolve, things evolve, feelings evolve, and the common wisdom evolves. Now, here's the reality here in 2020. The reality is that finishing your comic, getting your comic book 100% complete, is absolutely not a requirement of launching your project on Kickstarter, but it may make your launch easier. All right. And so I want to talk about some of the reasons why you might want to wait until your project was finished completely, or a little bit less, or almost finished completely, before you launch your Kickstarter. But then we can also address the fact that it's absolutely not true that it has to be 100% complete. And so some of the reasons why more complete is obviously best is that there's actually less risk to your backers, and less perceived risk to your backers when they see that your book is 100% done, and they don't have to worry about you or your artist getting hit by a bus or anything crazy like that. They can back with confidence and that, but there's also less risk for you, because again, you as the creator, you have less things you have to worry about when it comes time to fulfillment, right? Things become pretty easy when all you have to do is print something and then organize it shipping. It's another deal entirely when, especially if you've never actually completed a comic ever and printed a comic ever, like these are new accomplishments, new skills, new milestones that you have to achieve, in addition to the new milestones of actually printing and shipping and getting it out there. And so one of the things that getting your book 100% complete does is it actually removes the worst case scenario of a Kickstarter launch. Now, a lot of you are thinking, well, the worst case is you launch and you fail to fund. Not true. When you launch and you fail to fund, you're not on the line for anything. Like so the worst case scenario is launching, succeeding, and then being unable to fulfill. That's the thing that's going to potentially do serious harm, and is the most difficult thing to overcome. It's that too, obviously, or that too, probably not obviously, but that too can be overcome. I've worked with creators that have been able to overcome that as well. But I've seen this happen, more than a few times, where a creator, or especially a lot of times these are writer-driven projects, and they launch and they successfully fund because their marketing is good and they had enough to show so that people could trust that they could deliver. And then in some cases they pay their artist and the artist goes walkabout, or the artist can't finish the project, or things get massively delayed, or something terrible happens, and maybe it's no fault of any individual person, but they're unable to deliver on that finished piece of work, right? That's the worst case scenario. And that becomes far less likely when the project from a creation side is 100% complete before you go into it. The other thing is the more you have done before you launch, the more you have to show on your Kickstarter page, in your marketing, the more resources and assets you have to deploy, so to really put together a solid, rock solid launch, right? If you only have like a couple of images and a few character designs, after people have seen those things, there's not really going to be nearly as much that you can use to promote. All right. And so that's sort of the case for waiting until your project is complete or mostly complete. It lowers the risk for you, it lowers the risk for your backers. And when you're in the launch, you can focus just on doing an awesome Kickstarter launch. There's a lot of creators that think it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm about, I only need a few more months and this project will be finished. So my team can work me and my team can work on the book while the Kickstarter is going on. And they quickly find that the Kickstarter sort of overcomes and sucks away a lot of that creative energy that they would use on their project. So often work on the project itself comes to a screeching halt while you're in the midst of crowdfunding. And so that's something that you need to be aware of as well. But this idea that you need to be launching at 100% complete, it's just not true. Right now, for me, I do not always launch at 100%. I like to, if I have the preference, I will launch at 100% or complete, so that I can, again, just focus on having the best launch possible. But I haven't always done that. The first Kickstarter campaign that I ran, we were somewhere between 80 and 90% complete. It was an anthology project, so there were a few projects that were in the coloring stage or still had to be lettered, and some back matter that I had to do. And then we did some stretch goals, so that required adding a few other things. And I even came up with some ideas in the middle of the launch that ended up adding more time to the project. All right, but it was close. Like it was enough so that I was confident that this thing would get completed and I could complete this thing. And then it also wasn't my first rodeo, right? It's one thing if you've never completed anything in your life versus you have a track record of when you start something, you finish it, right? And so if you've never completed a comic book before, you might want to do that and make that your first milestone before you try to make your first comic also the first thing that you crowdfund and the first thing that, and you leave until after the crowdfunding before you even bring it to completion. All right. But there's some other things that you want to ask yourself, like, can you do this without crowdfunding? Because for some creators, they are not in a position where they could create their full issue or their full graphic novel or whatever it is, or even their full, mini short without some financial support. Like they don't have the resources available to them to get their thing, completely done. And therefore it is either don't do it or launch before the thing is complete, because they need to use the Kickstarter funds to help fund their projects. All right. And so if that's the case, then you want to say to yourself, okay, how can I still launch this by showing that I've put some of my energy, some of my time, some of my financial resources into this thing, and still show that I'm committed to seeing this through, but also and have enough to show that people would be confident that you'll complete it, but still be clear that you're going to need more funding to get the thing to the finish line. And then the other thing that you'll want to consider if you're going to launch before you completely fund is, do you have a contingency plan? Like, what if your artist decides he can't complete it? What if your team falls apart? What if X, Y, and Z, you get sick or other things happen? Like, what's the contingency plan? The good news is on a platform like Kickstarter and elsewhere, backers actually have a whole lot of patience. And as long as you keep your lines of communications open to them, if life comes up, you know what, they're going to be okay with this. And I have a couple of Kickstarter project creators who are multiple years late on delivering their project, multiple years late. And some of them are doing better than others. Some of them completely disappeared, and I assume that I will never receive that project. Some of them are reply with a lot of just updates that are not updates and just leave more questions than answers, and that's not a good approach either. But there are a few of them that basically when they post their updates, they post them frequently, and they show the progress that they've made towards completing the thing that they're going to get done. And but the other thing that I will also say is there is a cost. Sometimes people are like, well, I need to get this in, I need to get the funding in, I need that now. There's actually a cost of funding too early, and then having that stretch on and on and on and on. Because I know for many of these creators that they did a Kickstarter 5 years ago, right, and they're still trying to get it complete. All that money's been spent by now. Like, that's just money needs to move. Money moves. This. If you get money in, and other life is going to happen, right? Expenses are going to go up. Like, that money's gone. This project is still weighing on your shoulders. The fulfillment of that project is still weighing on your shoulders. It's a lot to take on, especially early. And so this is why one of the strategies that we encourage and we teach inside of Comics Launch Pro is a snowball approach, where don't take on for your first launch more than you're ready for, or significantly more than you're ready for. Yes, you want to reach up to the next rung in your creative career, but don't go from never done anything to I need to raise $25,000 to fund my graphic novel, and it's going to take, and I've only 5 pages in. Don't do that. It's taken on too much for you, and your project is going to be late. All right. And so, but here's one thing that I want to also encourage you, because I see this with a lot of creators too. It's that what they're really afraid of doing is the Kickstarter part. Like, the Kickstarter part is actually something that really scares them. And so they've let this idea that they need to get 100% complete be the reason and the excuse why they're not launching, or why they keep pushing their launch date back, and they push it back more and more because they keep expanding the project, or I got to redo some pages, or you know what, I'm going to remaster it. And it's that fear of launching that's that then becomes they justify it with the excuse of it needs to be perfect before I launch my thing. And if that's the case, and you find yourself continually pushing your project back, you may want to launch earlier, at like 75, 80, 85, 90% complete, so that you have that added pressure and incentive and promise to deliver to your backers to actually get the thing done, right? There's a quote out there that says, art is never finished, it's just abandoned, right? At some point, you got to say, this is good enough to launch, and you launch it, right? And so that's where my hat is at. We have plenty of creators inside of Comics Launch Pro who their business model is, I'm going to put together enough to show what the thing is, a couple of covers, at least 5 pages, sometimes 8 pages or more. And then we use the Kickstarter funding to complete the project, ship it out to backers. And then they keep doing that. All right. Those creators have established a track record of doing this. And that is another thing. Like, the better you are at making comics and delivering on comics, the easier it is for you to confidently say, hey, here's this piece, here's what's done. Here's what's still not left to do. But you know I'm going to deliver on it because my team is world class. We've done this before. And you've supported us before, and we always deliver on our promises. And that's one of those nice things about being able to build equity on the Kickstarter platform. You know, Jake Parker's a good example of a creator who, you know, had a couple of very big successful launches for art books and things, and then he went to Kickstarter with a massive goal to basically do a passion project and to help fund his page rate for a passion project. And he was successfully funded. Now, Jake's a professional artist and super, you know, has lots of credits, has done this thing. But even by him, with that track record, by doing that, by launching his Kickstarter project, successfully funding, raising, I think like $100,000 or around there, to fund it, because it was not done or even close to done, and it was a big project, he went well over the delivery date. But that hasn't crushed him or killed him or anything, because the whole time he's keeping his backers up to date. But even if you're a world-class pro, you probably run the strong risk of delivering later than you expect, the less you have done of your project. So this is all stuff to think about. Now, I have a lot of creators that are people that say, okay, Tyler, you know, I know you have a program that walks you through the Kickstarter project process. And when I'm ready for that, when my project is done, that's when I'm going to jump in and join you inside of Comics Launch Pro and learn your system to launch on projects. But then usually in those conversations with those creators, I then say, you know, all right, great. How's your audience? What's your audience size? Or how big is your email list right now as you're working on your project? And usually they say, well, I haven't started that, or I don't really have an audience, or I haven't started a launch list. And that is another big mistake. Like, and so the launch list, the email, the audience, that's something that you need to be carving out time to build while you're finishing the project, while you're working on the project. Even if you decide to wait until you're 100% complete before you launch it, this is the time in that lead up to that launch, that 100% complete. This is the time to be building that audience, building that email list, so that you don't launch to crickets. And we got a complete program inside of Comics Launch Pro called List Launch, which is all about building up that email list while you work on your thing. And so, you know, I usually, for a lot of those creators, they realize the best time to launch is actually or the best time to join Comics Launch Pro is actually well in advance of that Kickstarter launch, so that they can build that asset of that email launch list and then maximize the launch when they're ready, when their project's ready. So just some things to think about. Hope this helps. If you are struggling with how much to have done before you launch, share a little bit in the comments of what you're challenged and what you're thinking, and we'll try to get you some support. But I do want to also just remind you that you can go grab that awesome resource that I put together for you. This is the comic book Kickstarter roadmap. It's at comicslaunch.com/roadmap. It'll help basically give you the entire picture of what a successful launch looks like from the very beginning to the very end, and even beyond. So in a very consumable fashion. So check that out. Hope everything is going well. Hope your week is off to a great start. And I can't wait to see what you launch next.